in Oklahoma, just an idea, it's 468,128. And that was probably 2 months ago. So it's probably changed some, but that gives you an idea where you're at there. Now here, why do we plug wells? There's a number of things. These are kind of the highlights of it. Uneconomic, that's going to be, a decrease in production, decrease in product pricing can put you at the point where it's not economic to produce that well. Dry hole, that's just, basically what it says. It's dry, you drilled, it's dry hole, you got to plug it. Mechanical failure, mainly that's going to do to probably casing issues, where it's a point where the repairs are going to be more costly than need to do anything else. So you're going to probably at that point plug the well just due to mechanical failure. Usually that's going to be casing, which can be caused by a number of things, but it's probably going to be casing failures. Environmental concerns, one is like I mentioned, in a neighborhood, if you're in a neighborhood and you've got something that's seeping gas or seeping oil, that's going to be a major concern. That's going to be, you're going to have to jump right on that to be able to meet all the state's requirements, the city requirements. And then abandoned wells, landowner request or OCC, if you got abandoned wells and the landowners are like, look, you got to do something with this well. Like, I can't have it sitting in my middle of my pasture or my backyard or whatever it is, that the landowner can request to have that well plugged. This is one that was completed. It was right in town, as you can see on the left. We're driving right down the neighborhood street to get to this location. And then on the right, you'll see we had to run a pretty long length of boarded location, like what you see in Louisiana or Mississippi. We had to get all that in to get it to location where it wasn't damaging, wasn't tearing up the soil, wasn't tearing up the yards, wasn't tearing up the streets. So we had to treat it as a hazardous type area, which you're going to see on this next one. We had to treat it like a blowout, basically, because it was leaking gas in the neighborhood. So we treated it as if it was a blowout to be able to contain any gas or any kind of oil or gas. It was mainly gas on this one to get into the neighborhood. Go ahead. What?
Sorry, someone just entered and they had.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought someone asked. Okay. No problem. So that's kind of the extreme. That's going to be that big, that $500,000 plugging job that, you might have to have. Now, one thing, and I don't know, who all's out there in the audience, but what happened on this one generally was an operator bought a group of wells some years back and really didn't realize these wells were in the group they bought until they started having issues. And when they started researching, they come back to the operator and said, hey, you now own this well. And they're like, okay, you did the research, sure, they own it. So now they were responsible for this. So it was very costly. So I'm just saying, you might make sure you check that out if you're starting to buy a group of wells, if they're going to be located in some type of a city or city limits. The one on the right is one that's literally, you can see it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's a stub sticking out of the ground, and you can see there's some leakage there. So every once in a while it must burp out a little bit of oil. No house is really near it, but obviously you can see it does need to be plugged, does need to be taken care of. So we'll get out there and take care of it. One thing you got to think about too on one like this, that casing is wide open to the world. So you don't know, what someone might have dropped down in there, what's in there, because it's, someone out there hunting, messing around, kids throwing stuff down in there. So when you get on one of these, it may not be as simple as you think either, just because there might be something dropped in there because it's wide open. So here we're getting into some of the OCC rules. You must have a commission licensed plugging company. So the company has to go through the process of getting certified with OCC and have a license number. Whatever vendor you're using has to have that license number. The operator is responsible for plugging the wells. Working interest owners can also be responsible in some cases. And then you submit the 101 with a $100 payment, and this has to be submitted as a paper form. It's not a fax or an email. They require it with the payment and the paperwork to send in. And you can see I'm not going to go through all of it, but it's pretty well. I mean, if you don't get it all filled out, they're probably going to come back and ask questions. So get as much, if not all, filled out. Very critical down there in the bottom right where the little red tag is, make sure it's signed there by the agent.
And that goes to the district office, not downtown.
Right, and that goes to the district office. Now here's timing on plugging wells. If there's no casing, it's 72 hours after testing the well is complete. If the well presents a fire or environmental hazard, that's 24 hours. So they shorten that time up so there's no issue, no fire issue, environmental issue, or like these ones that was in a city limits or near houses or stuff like that. So only cemented surface casing, 90 days of no hazard is present. Production casing 1 year after non-completion or cessation of production. Now here's some of this is kind of interesting. Exempt wells is shut-in gas wells. Another one is a rent exemption from the OCC, supply injection disposal wells, and approved temporary exemption. That'd be through the OCC.
They're obviously not enforcing this on ducks. So.
Yeah, right. Jeff mentioned they're not enforcing this time on ducks. The notification of witnessing requirements. OCC Division District Office notification requires the field reps for each county. So you got 4 district offices in the state of Oklahoma. And you'll have a rep for each one or multiple reps for each one, depending on which area. Some has more than one, some has multiple. So
let me butt in real quick. And then at our next roundtable, all of the OCC division districts should be represented there too.
Okay,
so
perfect.
That will be a great time for everyone that's already attending to be like, I would love to just, shoot so-and-so a question. So sorry, I'll let you keep going.
No, that's great information. Thanks. And then production casing file form 101, 5 days prior to plugging. Form 101 expires after 90 days. Extensions can be granted. Now here's kind of a critical, it's best to visit with the district office before submitting the form 101. That district rep really needs to see the procedure, or you work with him on that procedure, because there's times when you can submit that procedure, he looks at it and says, oh, well, I want to change this or change that. It may be something minor, but it doesn't get his approval. So it's probably better to contact him, talk about the well, talk about what you're going to do, and then he very well will say, okay, yeah, sounds good, let's do it that way, or add this or take that out. So it's always good to get a hold of that district office, and through the OCC, you can get all that information on who, when, where, and what, and where they're located, phone numbers, and who you need to contact. And here's when you get into plugging, like I said earlier, well bore should be full of mud, a minimum of 9 pounds per gallon, minimum of 36 vis. So that, that kind of gives you your minimums. Obviously, some wells you might have to have 10, 12, 14 pound, it depends. I mean, that still has to have a little pressure or something. You still need, you may have to jump that up, but it has to have that minimum of 9 pound and 36 vis. Cement requirements, compressive strength greater than 500. The maximum Young's modulus is 1.2 times 10 PSI, permeability 0.1. All this is pretty standard. Minimum concentration of Portland cement greater than 20%, continuous flow pumping method. And, obviously you can't just, call DeLisi and start pumping cement or go to Lowe's and get bags of cement. It has to meet these requirements for them to approve. Bridge plugs or cement retainers are permitted to shut off perforations if the only opening to the formation are perforations. There's a 50 foot of good cement bond required above perforations. And so you can see here, cement bond, there is cases where you need to run a cement bond so you know where that cement top is, so you know what to do as far as where to possibly make your cut and where to put your cement. Bridge plug is less than 50 foot above perfs and good cement bond. So there's another case that, you got to know, where that bond is, where that cement top is, so you know where to set a plug. And we've got a couple of pictures here. These are just some basic cement plugs and retainers, just standard, nothing special about them. You just need something in there to bridge to put your cement on. And the cement on top of the 10 foot of cement on top of the bridge and you can just go ahead and dump bale your cement right on top of the plug. Cannot be the top plug. The bridge plug or retainer can't be the top plug. Intermediate cement plugs. Any formation not plugged by a bridge plug or cement should have a cement plug placed no less than 50 foot below formation or 50 foot above formation. Now, I think that can vary from what I understand. That's 50 foot is the minimum. I think a lot of the operators and a lot of these district reps like to be closer to 100 feet in most cases, just to make sure that everything's covered. The district office will almost always require the cement plugs to be tagged like we talked before. So, they're always going to have to be tagged every time you set that plug. They want to make sure it's there after it's set up and hasn't went away or moved, so that you're still covering up your cut or your casing there. If no treatable water exists, fill cement plug from 30 feet to 3 feet. If treatable water exists, no surface casing or surface casing is 25 feet or more above the base of the treatable water. Cement plug required from 50 feet below treatable water to 50 feet above the treatable water, or 3 feet. Now, here on the right, I've just shown here, this is just cutting off casing. You can, more than likely, it's probably going to be a chemical cut. You can abrasive cut it if need be. It just depends on the situation you're in. And the big thing here, I think, is the base of the treatable water. One thing you got to look at, and the way I understand is when these wells were originally drilled, that could be different than it is now. The base of the treatable water can be different. That's correct, Jeff?
Yeah, they've remapped some of those, so probably best to get a hold of the OCC and get a current base treatable water, because where it was deemed to be 30 years ago when they drilled the well may not be where they say it is today.
And they can get that. You can get that from the state, right?
Yeah.
From them.
There's an email link on the Corporation Commission site that you can send in a request.
And they'll give you what it
location.
currently is.
Yes.
Okay, surface casings below the base of the treatable water. Production casings should be cut no less than 50 foot below the treatable water and pulled. Cement plug required no less than 50 foot below the surface casing to no more than 50 feet above the base of the casing or 3 feet. District office also asked another deal with 100 feet minimum above and below casing. So 50 feet is minimum, but most all of them seem to require the 100 feet. Here's a couple of things just showing, if you get in there and you're pulling casing, you can go in and spear it, which is what you see there with the blue that's got a grapple on it. And you make the cut and spear and pull it if need to be. You can use a spear, or if it's not too heavy or too deep, you can just weld on, you might say a hook or a strap to pull it. And then if it's a case where it's deeper, you can see on the right there is casing jacks. If you had to use casing jacks to get it out of the hole. If it weighs too much or still kind of somewhat, been there a long time, it's in a bind, you could have to use casing jacks to pull that. And one thing is kind of into the future is these horizontal wells, more and more horizontal wells are probably going to have to be starting at the age of they have to be plugged also, possibly, instead of just what we always think of as plugging these old vertical wells. The horizontal wells, some of the early on wells might have to start being plugged, and basically they're treated basically the same.
The horizontal section is, haven't heard any instance where it's not treated just like a set of purse.
Yeah, so you would still be working in the vertical more or less, but it may be, the depths may change, but I think you're going to start seeing some of the horizontal wells are going to start needing to be plugged at some point, because that's just the volume and the inventory of them is increasing every day. So but it's basically, you treat it the same way. If a surface plug placed at this point, do not bring surface past or cement past 3 feet. The surface plug should be set from 30 to 3 feet. Surface casing will be cut 3 feet from below ground surface. Now that may change too with your rep, or if like you're in an area where there's a farmer and he's like, look, I'm going to be, doing this or, some type of operation there. He may want you to be at 4 feet or 5. And as long as that rep and you and the landowner agree, I think that's good to go. But 3 feet is the standard. And the operator, you cap the surface with a steel plate, and the operator will have inscribed the well number, date plugged on the steel plate. Here's a picture of one. I mean, you can't really read the date. It's down to the very bottom, but it's very simple. It's got to have that plate on there. So if they ever find it by digging up or doing whatever they may be doing, they can see this well was plugged. This is the name of the well, the date it was plugged. It's all going to be welded on the top of that casing, so they know what's going on. If they need to look back and figure out what's going on or what happened, they can look at it, and you'll need to have that on there. Alternative plugging procedures, and some of this is going to get into, these contingencies. If you can't, if you can't cut and pull, or you don't have a good cement, or those type things occur, then these contingencies, just like any operation we've all went through in our industry, you have that procedure, but it seems to vary tremendously at times. So if the well prevents from being plugged as per instructions, you visit with your district rep and talk about what the contingencies are, what the options are. Here again, you may have to perforate, you may have to run bond logs, et cetera. Over here on the right is just a perforator, basically just where you can either go in and perforate wire line, or more than likely you're going to have a truck out there. You can basically perforate, I guess if you had to, you could TCP if you needed to or wanted to. But I think mainly is the district manager and you need to get together on these contingencies, look at your options, and then together you can make that decision on which way you want to go. Wells can be plugged back and converted to fresh water wells, requires permission from the landowner. So that could be, if you're out on the farmer's like, I'd like to have that water, that water up hole. Well, that can be done as long as get the permission through the state and everyone's agreeable to it. You can plug it back to a depth where they can, have a water well, you might say. Here we get into a little bit on the, when it's a dry, on the drilling side of it, where you've got a dry well that should be plugged within 90 days after drilling is complete. Fill with drilling mud from bottom to 8 feet, cement from 8 to 3 feet. So it's a little different, but it's still basic. You got to get up to 3 feet with a cement plug, and then you're going to have a mouse hole that's got to be filled too. And as you can see, you fill the mouse hole with dirt to 3 feet from surface on the mouse hole. And then once you're completed, this is the form 1003 is filed within 30 days, signed by the operator and the cementer. Attach a copy of the most recent 102A form and get any blank spaces is probably not, that's not what they want to see. They want it filled out completely as much as possible. But also very critical where it's highlighted down there in red at the bottom has to be signed by both the district manager and the field inspector. Now that's the kind of, that I know we went through it quick, but that's the basic of plugging a well 101. There's always a lot more to it when you get out there if need be, but this kind of gives you an idea of what it takes. I think the critical is getting with your manager is probably one of the most critical, your representative, getting with them and going through what you want to do, where the well is, how you want to plug it, and make sure he's good on board, and then you can come up with a game plan. And here's
Does anyone have any questions or anything? Go ahead and feel free to unmute yourself. I'm sure Cliff is chomping at the bit to answer some answers or to. Oh, we've got a quiet crowd today.
Well, they are. Let's be after lunch. They want to keep them awake, I guess, or not.
Cliff, what's some of the top questions that you get when someone is coming to you and asking about plugging a well?
Oh, it's probably, you get a lot of questions about, probably a big thing is the casing, condition of the casing. The casing, if this well was drilled in 40 or 50, because some of this stuff is going to, you're going to try to apply these different operations, and you've got this old casing that you might not even be able to pull. It's going to come apart on you, and so then you've got to come up with a game plan there. And I think that's getting down to where you want to look at treating it as almost treating it as open hole, because you're probably not going to get all the casing out of the hole. So it's a lot of these old wells have a lot of issues with casing. And then another thing that I wanted to bring up was the salvage on these wells, salvaging tubing, salvaging casing, salvaging old surface equipment. Some years ago, that actually had a worth, but today it really doesn't have a worth. It's pretty well you know, just haul it off location is going to be a big thing, because it's just not worth anything anymore like it used to be. Used to, you had some worth to it. Even, you know, you could even, some of the plugging companies would plug it for salvage tubing, casing, and surface equipment. But anymore, that's not the case, because there's just not a market for that like there used to be. And that's a, you know, it's kind of a big, that's getting a pretty big issue now with when they go to plug these wells. I mean, it gets to the point where you're just going to have to cut it up and basically dig a hole and put it in, or take it to somewhere and put it in a hole, because no one wants it. And you got to be careful trying to sell it, you know, at the steel yard down there for so much a pound or whatever, because if it's got, you know,
You can't have norm.
yeah, it can't have any norm or they won't accept it. So you kind of get, you just got to think about that ahead of time, what you're going to do, and have a plan, so you don't have all this stuff just laying out there on the ground, nothing to do with it. So.
Interesting. That would be a great business for someone to start.
Yeah, it is an issue when you go to, you know, if you know, just say if you had 8 or 10 wells, you're plugging, and all of a sudden you got, you know, 8 or 10 pump jacks and a bunch of tubing, a bunch of casing, you know, what are you gonna do with it? You know, so you kind of have to have a plan of what you're gonna do with it once you get it out of the hole, or once you know, plug the well.
Would you say that's probably like one of the biggest issues that you guys generally find from the whole practice, like from the beginning to the end? Or is there another issue that's like always a pain in the rear, no matter what well or anything?
Well, I mean, can be a big problem, but I think on any of these wells, looks like the one we showed you that just had the stump sticking out of the ground.
Mhm.
It's the unknown. You know, it's better. It's probably a better deal if it's got a pump jack on it. At least you know it's sealed, it's capped off. Generally, you know what's in the hole, rods, this or that, whatever it is. But if you've got the one that's just opened wide open, I mean, they could have dropped hammers, balls, this, that, whatever down in there, and you don't know. And you go up and think, oh, this ought to be pretty easy. It's only a 2,000 foot deep well or whatever. And you get in there, and 100 feet below surface, you got something you don't know what it is, and you're bridged off. Then you got to rig up and start doing some milling and, you know, clean it out. And that runs into time and money, you know, so.
Has there been anything just ridiculous that you guys have found and just have really just chuckled about it?
Had to drill out a Civil War cannonball one time.
Oh my gosh.
So we actually knew it was in there. It was in the well history that they back in years and years ago, that was actually accepted way to plug it. But during a replug, we had to mill out a Civil War cannonball.
Man.
Wow. And you said that was like accepted as a plugging like years ago?
Probably back in 1920 or something, but then it started leaking. We had to replug it, and we had to get that cannonball out of there.
Oh my gosh. That's a neat little bit of history. Did you guys save the cannonball?
They'll come out in little bitty slivers.
Oh,
But I think the ones that's open too, you know, and you get a landowner that's, you know, you can see it's got oil on the ground right there. There's been a few little small sledgehammers dropped in the hole, and those are not easy to get out of the hole. They're not easy to mill. They're not easy to get out of the hole. That's probably one of the worst things that they can do. And they know that. Or if you drop a chain in there, a chain's never an easy thing to get out, but those kind of things is what you end up finding. Now, sometimes they're deep enough where it's not a problem, but a lot of times you end up forming a bridge at some point with something, and then you got an issue. Yeah. So you never know on that deal. So
I think Roger just unmuted himself. Roger, you got a question?
Quick question. If you got a landowner out there that's got a well on his property, but either there's no operator of record or the operator's gone bankrupt, well, how does he get that well plugged?
Probably go to the,
Yeah.
well, for the cleanup of the location, OERB will take care of that. It's probably best to go to see if he can get his corporation commissioner man to put it on the state plugging list and pay for it with the bond of whoever the operator used to be.
Okay, how long is that list as far as getting it done now?
Oh, who knows? That could be, I don't know.
yeah, I know though that when I talked to him here a while back, I mean, it was were 2 years behind at that time. And that was the ones they had already on the books. They were two years behind. So it may be longer than that in your situation.
Okay.
So go ahead and call and get your name
Yeah,
on the
I just
list.
say, yeah, probably better start that process like right now. Yeah. So,
Cliff, could you touch on what a chemical cut is? Maybe elaborate on the process a little bit.
basically, layman's terms, you run it in on wireline and it's got like a bromide fluid inside of a chamber that once you set it off, you might say, it just spits that chemical out and cuts the casing. It's run in on wireline on a tool on wireline, and it just basically eats through that metal, you might say.
How long does that usually take?
About a second and a half.
Yeah, it's quick, fast. Yeah. If you do it or if you do it with if you do like a abrasive perforator with sand, that takes probably 10, 15 minutes at the most. But a chemical cutter is the quickest on wireline. You're going to have wireline out there anyway, more than likely, or very possibly. But it's just a chamber that, once you hit the button at surface and set it off, it spits it out and cuts it almost immediately.
Got it. Thank you.
And leaves a pretty nice cut too.
The nicest cut.
Yeah. And that's that picture was a chemical cut. Yeah.
Any more questions from anyone?
All right. I think sounds like you guys are good to go to start plugging wells in.
Oh, goodness. Well,
Yeah, I mean, plugging wells, it's just you can go out and it'll be just a nice, smooth, easy job. Everything goes good. Or you're going to have them that's like the picture I showed you in the neighborhood that's going to be very extensive and very costly and timely, both, So it's always an unknown on what you have when you go to plug these wells. And it's
were
like
you,
this, you don't
were
know
telling
what's
me
in
that-
there.
Weren't you guys doing one maybe in like downtown Tulsa or something? Is that
Yeah,
right?
we've done 2 in Tulsa. We're getting ready to do 2 in Denver, and then some down in the Gulf Coast, and they're all in town. So it's treated, they treat it as a blowout, and that gets to be very expensive, even though it's not, but they treat it that way. And actually one of them was in a neighborhood that had a neighborhood small pond or lake, you might say, in it. And the well was out on an island. So they basically had to drain the water out, and we had to build out to the island and then put boards out to the island to be able to take care of it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
Do
again,
you-
that's why I say, just make sure when you're looking at packages or buying these packages, you just make sure you account for every well and where they're at, because that one well could be very costly for you if it comes up where it's got to be plugged and you're in the city limits.
Do you find that the cities are easy to work with when this happens, or is it kind of difficult because it's not a super common thing, not routine, I should say, I guess.
Tulsa worked with us pretty well, other than it was very stringent on the rules.
Yeah.
There was very, there's this is, you have to do it this way, no ifs, ands, or buts. They were very stringent. I mean, they worked with us, but there was no give and take, because there was, you're just a few feet from a house, so.
Right.
But they weren't too bad. They understood the situation. And, now you get in an area, and I'm not trying to say Denver is going to be different, but, Tulsa's a kind of an oil field town. So it was maybe a little bit understanding. You get in a city where it's not as you might say
common to have that downtown.
Common, they may be a little bit, maybe a whole different ball game,
Right.
But they were pretty easy to work with, other than they were actually stricter than the state.
Well, I guess that's good for their
Yeah.
They're city citizens.
Right. Yeah, they pretty well had to do that. I mean, with being in a neighborhood and, you know, the responsibility or if anything happened, you know, that would fall on top of, you know, could fall partially on them. So they want to make sure everything was covered A to Z. So
All right.
any
Well,
question or anything comes up,
if anyone doesn't have any more questions, then we'll go ahead and close this out.
okay?
Thank you again, Cliff and Through Tubing.
Well, thank you.
I'm fairly certain you guys have already signed up for the expo. So
Yeah,
come out and see them there. And Cliff,
Okay.
I know you always come out, and I think you usually play golf too, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there you go.
Can't
You
mess
can
that up.
come meet our local celebrity Cliff
Yeah,
here.
there you go. All right, thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Bye.